Good stuff. Okay. Very pleased to be here for the latest edition of our podcast, and very pleased that there's three of us here today. Massive welcome to Alan with us from Telent and Chris Burke from Morton. We're here to talk about SOW spend management and look at that in a genuine real-world application. So I'm really excited to get into this topic. Before we do that, as is kind of traditional with the podcast, can we get you guys to give a little bit of a kind of potted history? Would it be okay to start with you, Alan?
Yeah, okay. So Alan Withers, Senior Procurement Manager for Telent. Been there now just over 3 years. Before that, working in the civil engineering industry, and before that, spent some time overseas.
Excellent stuff.
Okay, I'm Chris Burke. I'm the Managing Director of Morton Engineering Group. I've been there for 24 years, and prior to that, I was an apprentice turner and a machinist for a few years, and then worked at Sellafield in the nuclear industry, also the paper industry, the chemical industry, and the pottery industry. So a wide spread of experience. And you think, well, where does a jack of all trades like that end up? And it's Morton Engineering Group, because we do a lot of things in a lot of sectors. So it's so I found my home really, and hence been there for 24 years.
But I think the point about your technical engineering background is quite a key part of this discussion, as we'll kind of come on to, and a key part of how this has all worked. Obviously, the real world example we're going to discuss is Telent, and the case example that Alan is leading within Telent. And that has ended up being a collaboration between Morton and Telent, and obviously utilising CWS as the technology within that relationship, working via Morton into Telent. So this is truly about collaboration, and it's truly about problem solving. And hopefully there'll be some really interesting things that come out of it for people that are listening to this. So I guess to get into the background of what we're talking about and where we are and what we're doing, it comes back to what was the initial problem that existed within Telent. Alan, would you be able to just kind of set the scene with that? And I think it was pretty much, was it before you'd actually joined Telent, there was some stuff kind of in the works?
Yeah, so, okay. So I started working for Telent in March 2021, and I'll leave your audience to decipher the significance of that date. Before I started, there were obviously the fundamentals already in place. So, statements of work as a principle was already in action for most of the company. But labour as a category, I've said it before to some people, was like the messy drawer. It was a fair few £1 million worth of spend, but everything and anything was just being piled into it. As far as categorisation or control of that category was concerned, you had engineers doing design works in the same sort of spend bucket as tree surgeons doing vegetation clearance on one of our sites. So when I started, I obviously did the first 100 days of looking around, seeing the governance and the controls of it, understood the concept and the reasons why statements of work were so important to us. But where I felt like it needed to be improved was the actual controls around statements of work. So you've got the first step. People are being able to articulate what it is that they're looking for from their supply chain. But how do you make sure that you put it into a system which you can then start to pull data from and actually start to influence where you go and what you're procuring? So that's how it started.
And in terms of the kind of the problem solving exercise, there was a solution of sorts that was being utilised. And I think this is the situation that you see in a lot of organisations. You end up with, 50% of global organisational spend is services procurement. If anything you're procuring under a statement of work engagement is effectively an outsourced service. You're not buying people's time. You're outsourcing a problem for someone to deliver you some sort of service or solution. It's a big area of spend for organisations, but a lot of organisations aren't managing this effectively, which is why it's so great to be able to kind of get this conversation out there in the wild and give people some idea of what's been the process, how it's all gone, the ups and downs and the drivers behind it. But a lot of people will kind of seem to paper over the cracks with it, in the sense that they'll have a massive amount of spend that's going through statement of work engagements, But due to having a lean procurement team, which most organisations do have, and lots of SOWs going through, you can't get the spend under management. You can't get your arms around it. Then you end up with potentially no process or manual processes, and just a lack of visibility, a lack of control, a lack of governance on it. Some people will be using Excel, email, Teams, phone calls. Some people will be trying to capture certain information, but it's pretty difficult without a specific take on it. So what was the kind of spark of initiative that really got this moving towards, hang on a minute, we need to do this differently?
So when I first started, statements of work, like I say, were there or thereabouts, but it was a Microsoft Word template, which, stakeholders would, to the best or worst of their ability, try and articulate what it is that they're looking for from third party. It would go to me to obviously review, make sure that it had, a commercial balance to it. The risks were obviously managed accordingly, whatever else. If I was happy with it, I would sign it, give it back to the stakeholder. Stakeholder raises a purchase order, and how it goes. But a couple things happened in those steps. Number one, you're very much dependent on the stakeholder having either the capability to articulate a good statement of works straight away, or secondly, cares enough to articulate a statement of work straight away. And then once they receive your signed copy and they raise a requisition and create a PO and give it to the supplier, you've got no assurity that anyone's actually even following what has been agreed thereafter. And in the first few months that I started working for Telent, an absolute tsunami of statements of work hit my desk, and I was trying to keep up with the wave of it. So I guess some of the drivers for me were, A, just trying to keep my own head above water with the demand that was coming through with hundreds of stakeholders that were doing, statement of work engagements with the supply chain. And then obviously from a procurement perspective, it was frustrating me that I wasn't making any impact. I was basically just a transactional part of a cog. That was all I was doing was, box ticking, and away it goes again. And I had no influence. I had no way of trying to save any commercial risks or anything for the business. It was just off you go. And I think that's quite the norm in a lot of industries and a lot of companies. I think third-party spend is normally managed, depending on the industry, of course, but I think third-party spend is usually done at a localized, typically project manager or QS level. So you've not got that holistic visibility of your spend. You've not really got that real detail about how you can start to influence and make decisions based on performance and obviously SLAs, KPIs and that kind of thing. It's just, this is my project, this is what I need to deliver. As long as they're doing that small little bit for me, I can pay them, I get paid, and off I go to the next challenge. So putting it into a system like we've got now allows you to start making much more of a strategic sort of decision based on what you're seeing in real time.
Yeah, and the thing that I think is worth pointing out about this program, about this SOW spend management program, is it is genuinely a proper services life cycle management program, and that's where obviously the Morton component of it, from the management side of it, is a critical part of that. So being able to kind of outsource some of that and offload some of that, bring in that additional kind of capability. But statement works have been around for a while, Chris. They're not nothing new, are they?
Well, I think a lot of people know Morton as a recruitment agency and a provider of engineering talent to one of the UK's largest, I think it's one of the UK's largest engineering and scientific agencies. And it's been going for 55 years. But what people don't know as much about is that Morton Engineering Group and Morton Projects have been going for 45 years. So we've been in the offload business for a long, long time. And we've got the scars of delivering projects and fully contracted out services on the back of that. And so that 45 years of pedigree of managing, defining scope of works for the client, because often the client wants to give you a job, but they don't know how to specify that and put a price around it. So we, in the discovery phase of any project, we help the client to define the scope. Once the scope's defined, price is agreed, we win the work, we carry on the work doing. we carry on delivering the work as the project goes on. Inevitably, there's variations. So there are extra asks from the client. Can you just do this while you're on the job? So variation management's key. And Mawson's have been doing that for 45 years. So when Alan asked us to come, can you help us with it? I thought, well, yeah, because it's what we do and what we do every day on a day-to-day basis. And that's how the conversation started. So, and as with a lot of clients, you do a discovery, you look at what they're doing now, and between the two organisations, we work, well, is that really a true business-to-business relationship? You look at the supplier as well is fearful, thinks he's going to lose his job, thinks it's not going to be right. So no, all you've got to do is define the outcome of what you're supplying, and then write that down on a piece of paper, and you get paid based on the outcome. And the suppliers, when we started talking to them, were quite on board with it, weren't they, Alan? That they said, well, actually, yeah, thanks for that, because we actually now the relationship is more formal, and they also realise it's a compliance service, it's a fully contracted out service. So and that's what we help Telent to get to that place. So.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point to bring up the supply chain. The parties involved with this, the supply chain, are an incredibly important part of that. And I think everyone benefits from, as you say, having that clarity, having that formality, having things documented. If overruns are happening, or there are changes happening, or things are late, it's not always the supplier's fault.
No.
It might be, things that are outside the supplier's control. So I think just being able to document that whole process has so much value in just that part of it. But when you look at the key drivers for why people are generally need to address their SOW spend and get some management around it, the drivers tend to come from an area of either like misclassification risk, or procurement efficiencies, or just kind of spend management angle in terms of just getting more spend under management. But all three of them kind of come together really when you've got that actual visibility.
And I think that's, just touching on Chris's point, I think that's why this works so well, is that when I first started to question the way that things were working, it wasn't because I thought that, I could outsource all of my third-party spend to a single company. Because I know that a lot of statement of work MSPs are, you give us the statement of works and we will draw in from a contingent labour arm of our business and we will deliver that for you. And it wasn't that. And I think that's, if you remember that meeting that you and I had, that I think that May meeting it was I have an excellent supply chain and they are doing excellent work for us. There's no question to the quality of what they're doing for us. It's about ensuring that we give them a fighting chance of delivering what we ask them to. So articulation of the statement of work being the first point of that. Once we have agreed on that and made sure that obviously commercially and health and safety and everything wise there's a balance to it, ensuring that the execution of the project is then delivered on time, to cost, to quality, that the supplier knows where they stand in, the delivery of it, the payment of it. If there's any variations and change, it's not ambiguous. They understand where they are. And I think that's where it worked really well, Chris, wasn't it? Was that I think you and I sat down, there was a bit of chaos around it at that time, and I think you and I had sort of sat in a corner and I just sort of walked you through what was in my head.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's what we do internally. So I have a commercial department who manages projects to make sure that we, when we're delivering a project, that we don't overspend, that the variations are controlled, and the client gets what he wants at the right quality and the right price. And what Alan was asking for was us to offer that as a service.
Yeah.
And that was new for us. And we thought, well, we provided advice about what a fully contracted out service looks like. Well, scope of work helps a client to develop scope of work. But we thought, well, we've never done this on a bureau basis where we provide this as a service which has got all the KPIs associated with it. And we thought, well, let's build a service blueprint and see what it looks like. So it was pioneering. It was I don't think anyone else in the industry offers a service like this. And Zivio was key to it, because we needed a thing that united both parties of Telent and us to manage it, and also the supplier to to come into it, which was sort of neutral. It's just a repository that manages the project, defines the scope, and it's something that everyone can see, and there's true visibility on it. And that was a really good thing. And we have our own internal project management system, but the CWS system is outgoing. It's client side and supplier side. Everyone can see what's going on, and it has that true visibility, which was a challenge, because we thought, well, how are we going to manage this? Is it going to be on this Excel spreadsheet?
And that was it, wasn't it? So I remember sitting down with you, and I remember I walked through it step by step, what was in my head, because I think at the time there was still this sort of misconception that I was trying to offload all of our third party to you or another. And I think you kind of went, okay, I'll take it away.
Yeah.
And then you set up a call and you introduced me to CWS, and you guys did your service demo, and it was just like yes, that's it. That's what we're looking for. And I've spoken to you before, Johnny, about this, like, how I thought that I was, going crazy, thinking, am I the only person that thinks that this needs to, have some sort of
be a thing? And there you guys are over there with this thing. And I was like, yes, finally, it came together really well. Yeah.
And I must say, Andy Hassel was the guy who found CWS. It was Andy that brought it to my attention. I went, well, we've got our own. What on that for? But then slowly I got it. It was the connectivity between supplier, client, and the management and the managers of the service as well. I thought, yeah, this will work. So.
Yeah, I think it's the specialised nature of the problem and solution in all areas with this. And I think, Alan's role as a change agent, which I want to come on to, is also a critical part of this. But that you need those different moving parts to all combine together to deliver the solution. I think a lot of organisations, when they look at SOW spend, they aren't aware of solutions being available. It feels like it's in the too difficult to do box. It feels like it's too hard to start. It's going to have to be too much spend involved at the start. But as you said, Alan, this has worked really well. And I think by the ways I would define it, I wrote down earlier, adoption, growth, return on investment. And I think from what I understand, what I've seen of the program, the adoption's been really good. It's growing within the business, which is fantastic. So it didn't need to start with a, boil the ocean type of scenario. And actually in terms of ROI, within kind of 6 months, you guys are seeing returns against the investment of the service costs, which I think is the absolute proof points in how well this is operated. And it's still only in the relatively early days. So there's obviously lots more to come, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, I think so. We're going to start talking about the change agent part as well, aren't we? So I think what worked well is it wasn't structurally any change to what was already happening.
Right.
So we already had the supply chain. We identified, we knew who we were using and how we were using them and what we were spending. We already had, like I say, the fundamentals of statement of works. So that wasn't a big change to expect our stakeholders to suddenly adopt. And what we did in this, obviously this integration, is basically just apply what they already know into a new area, be it the CWS software, and then obviously with the support of the Morton's teams to guide them through those next steps. It was adopted very, very quickly. I think there was a couple important bits for us, which I think we did really well, which was understand our stakeholders, understand what they needed, understanding how they worked. I think we spoke about that in the early podcast. You've really got to have a strong understanding, not only as what you do as a company, but how you do it. And then you have to then obviously take your stakeholders on that journey. I think we did it really well. I think lessons learned for me that I'll take now for the rest of my career is possibly bring in external stakeholders, so the supply, your colleagues in the company that can sort of come in and critique what you've got in your head. So we were talking about the Tiger team, weren't we?
Yeah. And then that's a pick two of the people who would be difficult nuts to crack.
Yeah.
The ones who are against it, turn them around first. Get them to be your evangelists, and the chances are that they'll iron it out and knock all the sharp edges off the service blueprint they were trying to define. And they did that. They did that well, didn't they?
So I'll give you the depth of this. So, I've already got the champ's permission. So it was a chap called Richard, and Richard is an excellent QS, but he's an old school QS. You know, the kind of the big chunky Casio calculator and the abacus. So he's
a bit high.
he's got a very certain, very particular way of working. You know, and he's not someone who's willing to change any of that, because it works well, and it's worked well for him for a very long time. And so when I started to obviously release a little bit of publicity out to the business about what we were looking to do, he was one of the guys that was not a strong believer of it, shall we say. And I think as much as I could hypothesize and try and think of every worst case scenario, you know, he's a guy who's lived in it. You know, he's the one who's going to be using it. He understands it throughout. So I think I introduced him to you guys at a very late stage. And that's I take that I should have brought them in much sooner. And it was him, and there was a chap called Phil that sat down with you and Andy. Just went through it step by step. And they did give you those sort of those sort of light bulb sort of nuggets of, oh yeah, okay, right. Well, you know, you've got the 90% of it written down, but that 10% could have really tripped you up if you had released this to the wild too soon. So yeah, I think we called them the Tiger Team, didn't we?
Yeah, they took all the sharp edges off the process, so that wouldn't have gone down well with hiring managers and suppliers. They said, "Can't you not do this?" So, and there were small changes, but they made all the difference to a good implementation.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I mean, it's the ultimate pressure test, isn't it? Yeah. Bringing the people that are going to ask you the really hard questions, that are going to be super diligent, detail orientated, go through everything with a fine tooth comb. What about this? What about this?
And that's the thing about change as well. I think when it comes to obviously change and transformation in any company, you're going to have that spectrum of people on you. You're going to have the supporters. Let's just say that sounds fantastic. I'm on board. And then you're going to have those skeptics that want to be proven. You know, they want to see it in action. And then you've got the people who are just resistant to change. And you've got to get those skeptics in, because they're the ones that are going to give you the most value. You know, they're the ones who are positively negative about it. You know, I'm open-minded to it as long as it works for me and it does what I need it to do. And yeah, I think in any change, you've got to be thick-skinned enough to invite those guys in and say, what do you think? You know, do you think this could be better?
It's just effective use of the resources within an organisation as well, isn't it? You're all working towards a shared objective. Everyone wants the company to be more successful. And people might have their reasons for thinking, oh, this might not be the right thing to do, or I don't want to change. But if you're having to put the business case in front of people like that are hard to convince, and get them involved in the practicalities of it, it's the best of all worlds, really, isn't it? Because you're absolutely working towards a problem solving, the perfect, the best possible solution for the problem. Mm-hmm. Two things in my head. So firstly, what is it about you that made you kind of decide you were going to embark on this in the first place?
Stubbornness. Yeah, I think I'm just one of those people that I kind of get frustrated with things if I don't see them working the way they should. Probably a bit more curiosity as well, that kind of like, you know, this can't be the status quo, and if it is, that's crazy. There needs to be some sort of solution that's better than this. Yeah, I think it's probably those two, and it's the procurement person in me also gets frustrated if I'm not making an impact for the better for a company as well. Yeah, I said that was it.
Yeah, it's what was it also that kind of, I know obviously Morton have got very specific capabilities, but what was it when you were looking at the potential solutions? What was it that kind of, why would Morton come to mind? What was it you saw them doing? Or you guys were already working with them in a different capacity or were aware of them? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we've always worked or had a relationship with Morsons in one way or another. You know, the size of Morsons, it's very difficult to not. You know,
provided labour over the time. We've also done some fixed price work for them as well. So I provided some consultancy, haven't we? We've provided consultants at the strategic level as well. And I think one of the other sessions that I remember was when we introduced Sophie Williams, who manages the FCOS service.
FCOS being fully costed out.
Fully contracted out service. People call it SOW, and I'm trying to introduce FCOS.
No more terminology.
I want FCOS to be the Oxford, the Oxford Dictionary,
the official definition.
Word of 2024. FCOS, fully contracted out service, which I think is what HMRC call it. And then Holly, it's a small team. It's only 2 people manage this, and Holly's the main person who's administering it. Gets it, understands what service looks like, understand that the hiring manager needs that supplier, and make sure that it's a compliant service. And if it's not, it goes to contingent labour, and that's one of the main ways that you've made savings, isn't it, Alan? I think a lot of and we do ourselves out of work when we do that, because we get paid for the management of the service. But if it goes to contingent labour, then that's the other side of the business that makes the money. So,
and that's where obviously there's the kind of decision tree element of it as well, where you have the contingent workforce program running alongside the SOW spend management program.
Yeah,
you effectively got a vendor management system managing the contingent stuff. You got Xivio managing the statement of work, and at the front to kind of knit things together, there's the decision tree part of the process.
Yeah, so we use it similar to a assess type product. It asks questions. It's based on the algorithm that the government used to make the decisions themselves, whether it's a fully contracted out service or it's contingent labour. Our system was inspired by that algorithm, and it's a web-based portal. And by answering, I think it's 40 questions. It started as 10. And I think it's up to like 30 questions.
Yeah, it's less than 40, I think.
Yeah, and it gives it's a bit of a ready reckoner. Works out whether it is a compliant, fully contracted out service, and that's the triage part. And that triage system was developed by Morsons, by our in-house IT department, but it's operated by Telent hiring managers.
And it sits within Xivio.
Yes, it's accessible in Xivio, and I think that the certificates go back into Xivio as well, because you get a certificate at the end. So there's an audit trail for anybody who wants to ask the questions about how have you made a decision and assured yourself that it's a fully contracted out service. And also, it's not, then it's also recorded that that's the reasons why it's not a fully contracted out service. So, and then what our team do is they audit that to make sure that the hiring manager has answered it. It makes sense when they look at the scope of work, they look at the FCOS assessment, they go, yeah, that's right, and then they'll pass it off. So that's how the process works. So hiring manager fills out the what's it called, FCOS check? I can't remember what it's called. Then it gives a certificate, and then it proceeds to the next step, where they actually put the scope of work on Xivio. And then our girls get involved then to make sure that the process is correct, and then manage it to the next stage, which is either a competitive bid or it gets processed to a purchase order through the approval route that Telent is. So we don't do any. Telent still make all the decisions. We just help them to make sure that it's a compliant decision.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, it's a self-service operation within Telent, but as far as the software sees, as far as Xivio sees it, Morton are a part of the organisational hierarchy within the Telent organisation, effectively carrying out a role within that side of it.
Yeah.
I think the thing that stands out from that is that all 3 of us are approaching this from the angle of solving a problem. We were talking about this earlier. You've obviously just been on an exciting motorcycling holiday. We were talking about on your motorbike. We in Thailand. We were talking about travelling, working abroad. Doing different things that challenge you in life, and you were mentioning that you get a real big dopamine hit from solving a problem.
Yes, yeah,
that's what it's all about for me with this, and I think this is such a good example, because what you've just described there is a very streamlined scenario where you've got a contingent workforce program, an SOW management program, operating alongside each other with this kind of like seamless links between the relevant technology, looped up at the back end through, I believe it's Power BI on the reporting side. So you've got an end-to-end process that's utilising best-of-breed technology, a third-party provider helping manage the service, and self-service within the end client. A lot of people would just, from the outset, would just think that's not possible. But it genuinely is. But it's taken, one of the things it's really taken is someone to drive the process. Alan, I asked you, you said stubbornness, things like that. From what I see in the market, because it's quite, this is quite a pioneering program. There's much more demand now. People are becoming more aware that it's a solvable problem, and there are solutions out there. But it still takes somebody with kind of a bit of a bee in their bonnet to say, I want to do something about this.
And I think that's why this has all worked out so well. Because, okay, I had something in my head. I had the kindling of a theory that this could be made better. But it needed me to talk to Chris, who's got that, that engineering heritage, to kind of really apply the mechanics to it. And then obviously with what you've created with Zivio, that's how it's all kind of, come together. Is I had this, like I say, I had the theory, had to talk to Chris about the practicality of it, and that's how it's been developed.
And it's infectious. When you meet a client that genuinely wants to make a change, then as an engineer, as an organisation, we enjoy solving problems. It's what we were saying before, you get a dopamine hit when the problem is solved. And then we obviously speak to a lot of clients as someone not as open to an innovation, and it can be frustrating. But when you find someone like Alan who's keen to try and to learn, and to learn together as well, because we've never done it before, eventually you get on a roll, and once you're on that roll, then you know it's going to be all right. And a process and a project like that, I think everybody enjoys working on it. Everyone gets that buzz. And it can be frustrating, and they can be shouting at the wall about things. But the acid test is if people are working in their own time, to come into work, I've had an idea. You think, well, it's obviously capturing some sort of enthusiasm inside the person and then everyone was doing that. I've had to think we need to do this. So it's good when you get it like that. Yeah,
definitely. And as a third party coming into this change scenario, so Alan's driving the change internally. He's building the case, coming up with the ideas. Then you're suddenly part of that process. Yeah. There's a bit of navigating required in that, really, isn't there, for a third party to come in and be part of that change process. I mean, obviously, you've probably got a massive amount of experience of that within engineering programs and within end customers with Morton Engineering Services.
Yeah.
But it's, how did you navigate that within Telent as an organisation? Because, you guys are, to a certain extent, the outsiders coming in to get involved.
There was some interesting conversations, weren't there, Alan? Because there was a bit of a mismatch and an understanding of what we were doing, what we were prepared to offer. And it just created a lot of discussion with key people to get a consensus. Oh, right, I get it, because there was a consensus that we were going to be doing all the project management. I thought, well, you can't be doing that. So, and that took it only took a day, didn't it, to understand exactly what we were supposed to be doing. But key in that, what was Jess from Zivio, I think.
Shout out to Jess.
Yeah, no, she was really, really level-headed person in the room, on the screen, because obviously we did a lot of it through Teams, and she answered a lot of questions and asked them well, got us to all understand what Zivio can do and what it can't do, and it wasn't just us, it was Zivio as well.
It was one of those. I think it was just one of those projects where it was just a coming together of people that just got it.
Yeah.
Each had their own skill and expertise, and it just so everyone bouncing off each other. Yeah.
And
it worked.
It's kind of like the dream scenario for us, because both Telent and Morton were very open with us.
Yeah.
So there was like transparency. We were able to get involved in the conversations. it wasn't just us liaising with Morton, it wasn't just us liaising with Telent. It was a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
And having people like Jess, being able to put people like Jess kind of like quarterbacking it from our point of view is brilliant. She's amazing.
Yeah.
But that openness, it wouldn't have been possible without that openness. And I think that's where, if you're genuinely approaching it as a problem-solving exercise, and everyone's got the right kind of attitude towards that, you can get a great outcome. It's where people are a bit guarded, or there's hesitancy around things. I think that can potentially be a real blocker on just getting the problem solved.
Yeah. Well, there were no blockers. Telent IT team were good. They helped us with the single sign-on. That was relatively painless. We thought it was going to be a problem, but it wasn't in the end. They worked well. And obviously, we were a busy team. They were doing implementation of other systems at the same time.
Well, yeah.
Right. So, and when the implementation went really well, I can't remember a day when someone said it's not working or it's broke or... Yeah, it was a surprisingly good implementation. And that all credit to Jess, Holly and Sophie in getting that side of it working well. The training sessions went well. They were well attended. It was a positive project, and not often you can say that.
Yeah, I think like you say, Holly and Sophie have got quite a similar attitude to Jess, and they're just like can-do people.
Yeah.
And yeah, obviously, if the key stakeholders, Alan's driving it from that attitude of like, the thing that about being a change agent in this scenario is, it's that the hard bit is accepting, well, no's not the answer. We're going to do this, because there's always going to be reasons why. Yeah, but it's not going to work because of this, or it won't happen because of that, or it's the ability to go, well, no, we're doing it. And I've seen that, and I think it's a very important part of it. But that's not for everyone, is it?
No, I think the benefit of probably what the value that I added in the integration of it was that, like I say, for a year or two before, I had lived it, and I'd lived it with the stakeholders. I understood how they were doing things, and I'd taken a lot of scars on the fact that it was all very labour intensive. So when it came to actually sort of influencing or trying to push for change with the stakeholders, I guess my role there was to encourage them, knowing that the value or the benefit that they would get from it. So it was that kind of like, that if you just take a little step forward, believe me, trust me, this is going to make your life so much better. Because like I said before, ultimately they were doing the principles of it already. It was just about making it smarter. So yeah, I think, and you do, when it comes to change, you find people who are willing to change and want to quickly adopt, and then you get the kind of guys who are resistant to it. You get the guys who want to almost deliberately try and short circuit it, or try and find the gaps in the fence, so to speak. But yeah, I think as long as you've got a strong stakeholder relationship, you can get it through what you want it to do.
So I want to come on to some of the kind of the potential this unlocks within Telent and within the Telent kind of interactions with its supply chain. But just before we come on to that, you raised an interesting point about the FCOS tool that your team have created, that sits as effectively the triage or decision tree, whatever you want to call it, at the front end of the process, that actually in this case sits within Xivio. We see examples where that might sit within Workday or ServiceNow or various source-to-pay platform, for example. It doesn't really matter where that sits. It's that front end part of the process that says, what is the work that needs to be done? Let's have a look at this requirement. Is that hiring an individual on a time basis, i.e. contingent labour, or is that a fully outsourced service or fully contracted out service? So just in terms of that FCOS side of things, obviously some of the work will be classified or reclassified as actually that looking more like contingent. Mm-hmm. So you're mitigating a misclassification risk, and actually that work is going to be best to be done in that way. And one of the things we were talking about earlier was just this kind of misconceptions that there are in the industry about whether it's better to do something using contractors or whether it's better to do something using an outsourced service provider, what you described as offload, or a fully contracted out service. And I think that's a really interesting one, because I always just look at it as it's the right work delivery channel, the right mechanism for the job. There's one's not better than the other. But you were saying this kind of, you tend to get these peaks and troughs where people will think, oh, it's cheaper to do it this way and it's better to do.
Over the 25 years that I've been working for Mawson's, I've seen offload as a fashion. It starts off, if you start off with an organisation that's got loads and loads of contractors, but they're making no progress on the project. And that really is because there's a shortage of management headspace. It's sort of, they're just shuffling timesheets, but the job's not getting moved on to a sufficient pace. So someone said, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this. Why don't we fully contract out something, give it to another organisation? And then someone goes, okay, but it'll cost a bit more, but we will get an assured outcome, because if we don't, the person that we're giving the work will lose money. They'll be burning they've got to manage the contractors efficiently. So offload becomes fashionable, and that'll last for 4 or 5 years, and then someone will say, seen all this money that we're spending on all this offload? If we employed all these contractors, we could manage it ourselves and save some money. So they go through the whole cycle again, and eventually they realise that by doing it on an offload basis, they get an assured outcome at the date, and if we don't, the offload contractor has got some skin in the game. You know, he will lose money if he doesn't deliver it on time. And he has to manage the scope of work, has to manage, if the quality's not good, they can say, oh, well, I'm not paying for it, you've done a bad job. So they get all the benefits for that slight increase in the fee. But the IR35 has driven and sort of broken that cycle in some respects, because now people are realising it's not that easy to employ contingent labour in a compliant manner, and it might be easy to offload it because that risk is passed on from an IR35 point of view. But really the benefits of offload are outshining, or out. You know, the IR35 is less of a problem. It's actually the benefits of offloading is better, because you get the idea that an assured outcome. The client, the contractor's got the risk, or the organisation supplying the services got the risk, and it gets managed better, because inevitably any project is subject to change. So there's change management, and both sides, when you do it on an offload basis, manage that change, because the supplier will not get paid if he doesn't make sure that variation is agreed and it's valid. And also the client will say, well, I didn't want that. You know, who told you that we want this thing? So by managing it through the likes of CWS, that change management and variation is managed as well, which is equally as important as placing the initial contract. It's that management all the way through, because projects will have a degree of change.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting part of it. And I think, you know, ultimately the mechanism of a statement of work isn't, you know, rocket science. It's a fairly standardized process of we'll pay you X to deliver Y, we'll contract on that basis. But the contract's like a living document, isn't it? Yeah. It's iterative, it moves as the project moves, and as a software platform, we are doing things, it's different enough from contingent labour to need to be done in a dedicated platform in a different way, because you need to track that as part of it, and it's just a completely different mechanism of getting work done. So as you said, it's not necessarily better or worse than contingent labour. It's just different. So it's what's horses for courses. What's the right work delivery channel for that particular thing?
But a statement of works is only as good as the person that's using it, or not using it. So you can draft the best statement of works going, but if there's no one actually following through with it, then it becomes a redundant document. And I think with what CWS is doing, and obviously with our partnership with Morton's now, is it's ensuring that for the good of us and the suppliers, it's about managing what has been agreed in that document, and obviously with notifications and automation saying, right, this is due now, can you confirm that this has happened, yes or no? As simple as that, because otherwise you've just got documents that float around in the ether that no one really goes to unless there's a problem.
I spoke to a chief procurement officer of a large global organisation who was talking about spend in the low numbers of billions and he mentioned to me that he's like 70% of that was services procurement, so under statement of work, and he was basically saying, I don't know where most of those contracts are, and they'll be kind of like signed scanned PDFs in a document repository, which if you wanted to actually go back and look at that, so say someone says, how did consultancy X perform over the last year? No one knows.
Yeah.
You'd have to actually go back and find the statement of work, if you can find it, for each project, and it might have deliverables in it, but they probably changed. Probably no one was measuring against them. Nothing's been actually documented.
Yeah.
For a lot of organisations, it amazes me that they literally have no information below PO level. They just have no visibility at all below PO level. People are getting paid, work's being done, but is it good work? Are they getting value for money? Is everything overrunning? Is everything being changed? Is it effective? People just don't have that visibility. So, as I say, a lot of organisations currently, I feel like they're sitting there thinking there's too many barriers to doing this.
Yeah.
But when you look at that from a Telent perspective, in terms of how those barriers were broken down, there was a definite process to it. There was a definite kind of step-by-step process. But the first step to that was saying, surely there's a better way of doing it than what we have now.
Yeah.
What advice would you give, Alan, to other organisations that are looking to try and kind of like make the first steps or try and address this as a problem?
Well, I think if we use your guy as a reference, so he's aware that there is a lot of uncontrolled spend, but he also, from what you've just said, is aware that there are some vague document controls involved in this. So, you should be looking at who is articulating that, what documents have you got, and how are they sort of administered after that, and then from there, you then start to map it out what should happen. So the development of a statement of works. Okay, what are the pass rates? What are the gateways to say that that's acceptable? So we mentioned about the FCOS, and then, okay, right, so both parties agree to it and execution of works begins. Okay, so what happens next? When do you pay them, and what are the criteria? And so it's just about starting at whatever building blocks you have and then starting to map out what should be happening after. We were talking about the FCOS, and the one thing I love about the FCOS is it's not just a tool that controls the traffic. So, okay, contingent labour or statement of works. You can actually use it, and we do use it for, further development and education. We, at the very beginning, we had an FCOS that failed the assessment, so that, by rights, it should be contingent labour. And I think it was Sophie or Holly that brought it to me and said, we've had this failed FCOS here, but the project manager's pretty sure that it should be a fully contracted out service. And long story short, it was a scaffold company. And Telent's got no right to be managing, supervising or directing a scaffold company. So what I did with that FCOS was read it and understand the tripping points in the assessment, because what that was then enabled me to do is sort of, you start to educate your project team and say, well, these are the reasons that's been flagged in red. You don't need to be doing all of this extra work to try and keep this subcontractor in line, because they are a subcontractor. You just basically control them via statement of works, and there's skin in the game, commercial, health and safety risk, and that's it. So yeah, to answer your question, you first have to see what the blocks are that you've got already, and then start to put them into a sequence of a process that starts to benefit your company.
And then you can change the behaviour. If it's a critical supplier and they will only work with you on a purchase ledger basis, and they won't go down the contingent labour route, then you have to educate the supplier. So, well, you're going to have to change your behaviour. You're going to have to put some skin in the game. You're going to have to get paid on an outcome, not on a timesheet. And they'll go, all right.
It's just doing it properly, isn't it? It's like the reforms to IR35. All it's doing is forcing people to do it the way it was meant to be done in the first place.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing with Telent. There was no deliberate attempt not to follow the rules or the processes, because it was happening. It was just so much quantity through it that not one person could manage it on their own. It needed a system to control that, and it obviously needed, with the partnership that we've got with Morton's, someone to watch the quality of what was going in, someone to watch the quality of what was going through, and then what passes throughout. So that's what we've created.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I find quite intriguing when I look at the market in general, and I look at what we're all doing within this particular program, which is I think a great example of how to do it well. Within a lot of organisations, there's a real lack of ownership of this problem. If you look at the way that services procurement, so talking about statement of work engagements, lump that up to the next level higher, it is the procurement of services. It's all different types of services that could sit in different procurement categories. So within a lot of organisations, you have different category managers. Are they owning it? Is any one of those category managers or kind of like a category director going to own it? Maybe, maybe not. Does it sit within procurement excellence? Is it the CPO's problem? The CFO is certainly going to be interested because there's a lot of money going through this type of spend. But I feel like in some organisations, some end organisations, that is potentially a bit of a problem of no one's actually owning the problem. And it also reflects in the fact that the nuances of services procurement, where you're trying to make the intangibles tangible, effectively, of the wide variety of services, the fact that they can change, they're hard to define, by their nature they're very hard to measure if you don't capture that information. I feel like there's a lack of kind of standardized industry information or standardized industry qualification around how services should be managed. Whereas you look at lots of other areas of procurement, it's very well kind of stratified and structured. I feel like services procurement is amorphous in a lot of organisations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And really it relies on the hiring manager. Well, how can you control a hiring manager? Because he says, I need this person and I need that organisation to do this work for me. And a category manager is going to go, well, he's going to have to bounce for that, isn't he?
So if you look at, for example, like the civil engineering industry where I started, okay, so you've got a procurement office typically, and they're typically going to buy you your goods, so your concretes and your sands, and they will have an influence on it because they're controlling the sort of gross volumes and the gross spend of that. So this year we've spent £1 million with you, and therefore we want a rebate and we want a reduction next year because we forecast we're going to spend more. And for services and subcontractors and whatnot, what's usually the way that it's managed is on a localized level by a quantity surveyor, or whatever else. So they're on a project requires, like you said, something to happen. They'll go and speak to 3 people that they know or whatever. Best price or best quality wins, gets the work. And that's it. That's they get a subcontract order, work gets delivered, invoice gets paid or whatnot. And that's the way it goes. And I think procurement traditionally have always said, oh, okay, that's fine. We've got our own things to be getting on with. So I don't think procurement's really ever been invited into that conversation or certainly wanted to come and take a look at it, really. So like you said about the CFO and the spend, is that if you look at the pie chart, procurement could probably put claim to 1/3 or maybe 2/3 of the overall business corporate spend, but then there's going to be this great big gap here that's done at a localized level. And like you say, Chris, the person who has the overall decision-making authority in that area is going to be the project manager because he needs it and that's it.
Yeah.
But I think what we have done with CWO is, because all the data now goes through CWO, and that's the great thing about the seamless transition into it, is we've not changed that. So QSs and project managers are still procuring services via the traditional method. It just all goes through CWO now. And then once you've started to let the data start to flow in, you can then start to see the holistic view of the supply chain. So, what you'll find quite commonly is 2-3 suppliers doing the exact same thing, whereas that one's priced it a little bit more, that one's priced it, so you get to see from a procurement point of view where you can gain cost efficiencies, where you can start to bring down the price but maintain the quality, which is obviously where value comes from. And that's when procurement can start to influence service procurement.
Well, your material thing, procurement acts as a gatekeeper.
Yep.
But the problem with buying services, there's no gate. The gate really relies on the project manager, the hiring manager. Well, this service blueprints given Telent is the gate. So now you can keep that gate because you can see what's going on. It's visible. It's obvious what's going on. There's a process. There's a triage element to it. So you've now got a gate, and now procurement can be that gatekeeper. Before that, it was no gate, no fence. It was just,
and the old
bills are coming in, purchase orders are going out, but it was chaos for you, wasn't it? You said you had a year of chaos trying to work out what's going on. It was like crowd control.
It's certainly like that in most organisations that I see, and I think the fact that Telent were willing to do something different, and they, Alan's coming to them with a business case and a proposition and suggestions, and obviously your senior team were supportive of that. That makes all the difference, because ultimately it's about what's in the delivery. And I think when you look at the success factors that can come out of the back of this, by capturing that information through this very standardised statement of work engagement workflow, services procurement workflow, nothing needs to change with that. Like you say, all that's happened is it becomes self-service system delivery of that. So you're capturing all parts of this information. And then when that gets really exciting further down the line, as well, is when you can start looking at things like supplier performance and internal performance as well. Like, how often are the cost overruns? How often are the changes on projects? How often is that due to internal issues versus external issues? What are causing these cost changes? And also being aware of stuff in advance. So, and again, from a supplier relationship point of view, if you're going into a QBR and you've got up-to-date information on a statement of work where you can see changes in this and that and the other, if you've got the context to see why things have happened, it might be that you're very much patting that supplier on the back. Great job coping with the fact that this kind of went off the rails. Whereas without that visibility, it might be more of a, well, hang on a minute, what the hell's going on here? So I think it's just the simplicity. It's this capturing that information, visibility, control, automation, so you can actually scalably manage the volume of engagements. Then that just means you can operate in a more sophisticated manner, a more strategic manner. Like you say, it shouldn't be that a procurement person is having to do all this tactical stuff or basically act in an administrative fashion. That's what software is for.
Yeah. Well, it's that procurement in a procurement of services often acts like a policeman. It's after the fact as well. After the crime has been committed, a purchase order has gone out, a supplier has been used that's expensive. It's all found out after the fact. The process enables to make that decision. And the hiring managers and the suppliers have been very positive about the system as well, which is surprising. I thought that they would, oh no, there's more bureaucracy, this is going to be, but there's been none of that.
So there's a couple of things in Xivio, I think, that have gone down really well. And so procurement has a bit of a stigma that we kind of hold all the suppliers. There's this secret blacklist of suppliers that only procurement sees, and you've got to come to procurement for us to give you one that you're asking for. And I think the one thing that has gone down really well at Telent is the supply profile pages.
Yep.
And that's a two part to that. So it means that my stakeholders can basically go shopping. There you go. There's your supply profile page. I know that by being on board, they're being PQQ'd, contracted, the contract's in date, and they've got all their accreditations and qualifications. So I'm happy that they can basically do what they want. The stakeholders like it as well because, the suppliers like it as well because they've now broadened their network at Telent. Where it used to sit in silos and each project manager or QS had his own particular suppliers that he would go to, now he can log in with a couple of quick searches, he can see others, and he can start to see performance reviews and start seeing feedback about, what the recent experience with those suppliers has been. So it's gone down really well, I think.
No. Are you guys using that for kind of horizon planning and kind of expressions of interest as well?
So we are using it for obviously my category strategies. So and that's where I've got to now with this is because, like you say, I was tactical at the time. Now that all the data is starting to pump in through Xivio, you can start to strategize. You can start to actually make plans on what your pipeline looks like as a business and where you want to, what you're going to be doing as a business in the next year or two and who, you should be offering those opportunities up with. So it's certainly helping us strategize.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes when software is introduced to a conversation, or as part of an additional service that's coming in to help with the situation, it can make people, I can see how or I've certainly heard the case of some people in procurement teams sort of thinking, is this going to mean that I'm not needed? But actually what it means is you can do more useful work. You can do more meaningful work.
Yep.
It's just pushing it up a level, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, we've seen the organisations using for things like capability planning across their supply chain, but on a holistic basis. Whereas half the time, if suppliers aren't visible, like you say, they're missing out on stuff because people aren't aware of them in different areas of the business. But also, it's just sometimes you'll have an organisation that's desperate to get something done, to do it quickly. They need somebody that's on board that has these specific capabilities, but they just can't see them. And that's where also we've seen people using things like expressions of interest, which is, obviously putting it into that context of saying, we've got this stuff coming down the road. We're not ready to do it yet, but who's got capabilities and who might be interested in this? Maybe you need to build your supply chain. Maybe you've got people in there who could already do it, but that's something that's been quite interesting that I've been, pleasantly surprised about how useful that's been for people. But just coming on to the kind of what this has ended up delivering for Telent and for the suppliers. So obviously there's efficiencies around it, there's greater visibility. I feel like it puts Telent in a very good light in the sense of doing something innovative and engaging proactively with supply chain and showing a real attitude to be open with the supply chain. Are there any other things, obviously, savings, efficiencies, things like that? Are there any other things that you think Telent will, in the long term, benefit from this approach?
I think you're going to get to a point where, as I said, at the very beginning, labour as a category was the messy draw. Like I say, it was everything and anyone was in there, from subcontractors doing physical works on site to professional services and whatever else. We even had the window cleaners. Well, true story. We had the window cleaners that do our office in my labour category. The vision I have in my head is that we will very soon get to the point where the spend is managed, that there are strategies behind each one of the what we do as a company, and there will be a procurement, sort of how a procure to pay process for each. So it'll be statements of work, it'll be frameworks, it'll be contingent labour, but ultimately our stakeholders will know quickly where to go for each. That's where it will get to.
And ultimately, that puts Telent in a great position to be able to provide the service they want to provide to their end customers, in terms of knowing you can deliver, looking at projects coming down the line, seeing what capabilities you've got, and then being able to access that effectively.
Correct.
Which is great because it takes procurement away from being the police to being a business enabler at that kind of very top level, really.
Yeah. It stops the kind of, like I think you were mentioning before about the pain between procurement and the projects team.
Yeah.
Is the supplier onboarded? Have they got a contract? Oh, this is a maverick spend. Just removed all of that, and you've enabled your stakeholders to make quick decisions based on how they want to deliver their works, which in turn obviously adds value, which in turn brings more value to our clients.
Yeah, which is actually got to mention, one of the reasons that suppliers are positive is because we do the onboarding onto Zivio, so all the compliance elements to be a supplier to Telent is done. So they end up on a supply list. They end up on a PSL, and that's one of the reasons. Well, at least I know where I am. I am on a PSL now.
And on top of that, and the other, I think we got an email of thanks, didn't we, from one of the suppliers at the beginning. They know where they stand, in as far as where they think that they should be within that project and milestone delivery stage, and their invoice payments and who should be approving it at what step and what state. They've got their own dashboards, so they can go in and see it. And we actually got an email, didn't we, from one of my suppliers saying, thank you, that we've been kind of limping this along now on spreadsheets ourselves, and now that we've got this dashboard for us, we can totally see where we are.
Yeah, it's funny how some people would look at it and think, well, the suppliers aren't going to want to be controlled, they're not going to want to be visible. But actually, there's a lot of benefit to that. They might be doing great work and they need to be appreciated for it, or they might be they might be getting left behind when it comes to payment because something hasn't been approved, or it's hard to prove that it's been approved, and they have no agency over internal processes.
And this goes back to, I think, the very, very beginning part that I spoke about. I think statements of work for an MSP solution at the moment in the industry, there's this idea that I will outsource my third-party spend risk or whatever else to a company like Morton's, and using their contingent labour business, they'll just resource it and deliver it for me. That's not what we were doing. I have an excellent supply chain doing excellent work for us. And what we've done here is just basically make that better. They're still doing brilliant work with us, but it's now more collaborative. People know where they stand. It's just fantastic.
Cool. Okay, so I think let's kind of wrap up the conversation now. Really, really enjoyed this. It's been great having the kind of three-way input. I've really enjoyed that and hearing the different sides of the story. I've certainly learned some stuff from it as well, and it's been really interesting to hear about how the journey went in a bit more detail, some of it which I haven't necessarily been exposed to prior to today. I've got two last questions, and they're mainly for you, Alan. Just in terms of this whole enterprise, from when you kind of started out with it, came up with the idea, need to do something different, started looking into it, consulted with Chris, looked at the wider market, and then going all the way through the process to where we are now. What's been the biggest surprise for you in all of that process?
Touch wood, how well the stakeholders adopted using it. Like I mentioned, the fundamentals were already there. The idea of the theory of statement of works was already there when I started. But you're always going to have a bit of fear before go live, thinking, is this everything I thought it was in my head? And then go live and you kind of hold your breath for about a week or two to hear what comes out of it. And actually what really came out of it was a lot of positivity. Yes, there were, still stakeholders that needed a bit of one-to-one, a bit of training. But what felt great was when you're going through that with them and then you're getting the feedback from them. On a lot of circumstances, there was a lot of sort of relief from the stakeholders to say, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." The excitement to use it because you've answered some of their problems. And ultimately in procurement, I don't make a revenue for the business. That's not what I'm there to do. My job is to serve the stakeholders and make their life as easy as possible, as compliantly as possible, in order to deliver for our clients. And so it's a great feeling, once that starts to run. And I think I was nervous and I was surprised how well the implementation was.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of ties into my second question, which was going to be, what are you most proud of from it? But it sounds to me like there was an opportunity, a realization for you that other people within the business were able to see what you'd seen in that initial vision and actually go, yes, that does make things better. Is that what is it that's made you most proud of this whole kind of enterprise?
I think as a particular, I don't want to use the pun, but as a particular milestone, the feedback that we got from one of the suppliers, because that was completely unsolicited. It was a thank you email from one of our suppliers to say, thank you for doing this because this has made our life a lot easier. That was a really, really proud moment. We're now actually getting some stakeholder feedback. We've sent out some questionnaires and we've got some stakeholder feedback, and that has come back really positive. That makes me really proud. Just watching how the team itself, so you've mentioned Sophie, Ollie, Ross, those guys are just, Jess, they're working so well together. Everyone knows what they're doing. They each trust and depend on each other. That's made me really proud. And yeah, I think just answering a lot of, problems for the stakeholders, making ultimately their life easier, and giving that solution. It's really, it's been fantastic.
Brilliant. Well, it's always an ongoing thing, isn't it? We've all got to keep a close eye on things and make sure we're always striving to improve it. But like I said at the beginning, with this kind of like problem-solving exercise, all three organisations are very much of that mentality, and it certainly feels good when you do get a good outcome. So, that's good feelings all round. But listen, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate you coming in and joining me for this chat. And look forward to the future and continue conversations and working with you guys as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Cheers.